Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Doc Janelle and the subject at hand is neuroanatomy. For this discussion, we'll be talking about the organization of the nervous system, the neuron, and the neuroglia. So if you're ready, let's start. For this discussion, the following objectives are in place. So first, I want to introduce to you the divisions of the anatomy of our nervous system. So basically, when we talk about the structures and the parts of the nervous system, they are divided into two main divisions, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. When we talk about the central nervous system, it is composed of two important organs, the brain and the spinal cord. So please do remember that only two specific organs are part of the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system are all nervous system structures that go beyond the central nervous system. Meaning, paglabas ng brain, paglabas ng spinal cord, they automatically become a part of the peripheral nervous system. And there are also two important structures which are commonly attributed sa peripheral nervous system natin. Those are your cranial nerves and your spinal nerves. Again, remember, peripheral nervous system are structures that go beyond the brain and the spinal cord. When we talk about the physiology, the functions of the nervous system, they're also divided into two. First is the somatic nervous system, which controls or innervates the voluntary structures of the body. So, ang kinokontrol ng somatic nervous system natin ay yung mga body parts natin that we can move voluntarily. Basically, our skeletal muscles, kasama na rin dyan, of course, ang ating skin at ang mucous membrane. While when we say autonomic nervous system, from the word auto, it controls activities of the body which are involuntary. So it falls under smooth muscles, the glands, the internal organs, and even the blood vessels, no? So kapag kumain ka naman ng food mo, you don't have to command your stomach, your intestines, your glands, no, to start digesting the food. It automatically happens. So those kind of functions fall under autonomic nervous system, while the decision to take a bath, the decision to write down, the decision to run, to walk, those are all voluntary movements, so it falls under somatic nervous system. So, when we talk about the brain, there are several divisions to it. Pag sinabing divisions, they are not necessarily structures, pero they are important in classifying the different structures found in the brain. So, the brain has three main divisions, and these are the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. Okay? So the forebrain starts from this big structure being pointed out by my pointer right now, no? Ayan siya. So this structure that you see right now is called the cerebrum. And the cerebrum belongs to the forebrain. The second part of the brain, which is part of the forebrain, is called diencephalon. However, the diencephalon is an internal structure. Nasa loob po siya ng brain. Therefore, in this image, we won't be able to appreciate it. The forebrain is very important because it composes majority of the brain. No? Siya yung biggest part or the biggest division. And most of the most complex, most advanced functions are found in the forebrain. Okay? Next is the midbrain. The midbrain actually is a part of a structure in the brain called brainstem. So, ang midbrain ay parte lamang ng brainstem natin. At ang brainstem is composed of three structures. The midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. No? So, yan yung tatlong nagko-compose sa ating brainstem. But, the midbrain is actually a division on its own. Kahit na small structure lang siya, part of the brainstem, siya mismo is already considered a major division of the brain. And lastly, we have the hindbrain. The hindbrain is composed of your pons. Ito siya, no? Parang um, protruding portion of the inferior portion of the brain. We have the medulla oblongata, which is this stalk right here. And then we have the cerebellum. So usually the hindbrain is composed the most inferior parts of the brain. Kumbaga, sila yung pinaka nasa ilalim. So again, the divisions of the brain include the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. So before we go to the spinal cord, I just want to simply show you, no? Again, the forebrain is composed of your cerebrum. Again, we cannot see the diencephalon in this image because that is an internal structure. We have the midbrain. Kita nyo naman, no? Very small lang siya. Kasi parte lang talaga siya ng brainstem natin. Itong pino-point out ko ngayon, brainstem natin yan. Pero the midbrain on its own is already considered a division of the brain. And then the hindbrain has your pons, your medulla oblongata, and your cerebellum. Now, after the medulla oblongata comes your spinal cord. It is a long tissue, which is one of also the major organs of the central nervous system. And the spinal cord is also divided into several segments. Okay? So, let's take a look at this colored image on the right for better visualization. The first segment of the spinal cord, right after the medulla oblongata, is the cervical segment. Yan. The cervical segment, colored blue here, followed by the thoracic segment, the longest segment of the spinal cord, colored purple in this image. And then you have the lumbar segment that's found in your lower back already, the lumbar segment. And colored flesh in this image is your sacral segments and your coccygeal segments. Yeah. That's similar to the image on the left, no? Your cervical, your thoracic, your lumbar, sacral, and coccygeal. Okay? Now, when we go to the peripheral nervous system, again, composed of your cranial nerves and your spinal nerves. These are structures that go beyond or go outside of the brain and spinal cord. So in this image, we still see the brain, right? It's the underview of the brain. And we can see certain fibers coming out. May mga lumalabas na fibers out of the brain. So those are your cranial nerves, okay, which has several functions, and later on towards the semester, we'll be able to discuss them one by one. So we have 12 cranial nerves, part of our peripheral nervous system, and these are the olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus accessory, and hypoglossal nerves. It's important for us to memorize them in order, meaning olfactory always stays as number 1, optic stays as number 2. We cannot mix them up, no? So they come in order. So in order for you to memorize them, I gave the most famous mnemonic that is being taught in many medical schools. This is OOO to touch and feel, virgin girl's vagina, heaven. The first letters of the mnemonic corresponds to the first letters of the cranial nerves. So if you want to memorize them in order, this is the mnemonic that is most commonly used. If you do not want to stick with the mnemonic, then it's fine with me. All right? And of course, we have your spinal nerves. So the spinal nerves are actually fibers that go beyond the spinal cord, no? Let's take a look at this image right here. We have here the spinal cord, no? Ito ang itsura niya when you cut it in half, no? When you cut it in this manner, yeah, pag ganyan, pa side, then you get this view. The spinal nerves, no, are fibers that go out of the spinal cord, okay? And as you can see in this image, no? Ayan, yung naka-box ng red, that's our spinal nerve. Once lumabas na siya ng spinal cord natin, yan na, it becomes part of the peripheral nervous system. And this structure right here is your spinal nerve. And similar to the spinal cord, may mga segments din yung ating spinal nerves, no? We also have the cervical segments. We also have the thoracic nerves, the lumbar nerves, and the sacral and coccygeal nerves. So basically, they're almost the same. No, the only difference is peripheral goes outside, while the spinal cord is a spinal cord. Okay. So in order for us to better understand neuroanatomy, we cannot do away with anatomical directions. Marami kasing structures, maraming parts ng brain that would be confusing if you're not able to properly describe where they are located. So first, I wanna show you this image in the middle. This is our brain. Okay. So, imagine that this is where your forehead is. Imagine that this is the back of your head, that this is the top of your head, and this is where your neck is located. So basically, our person is looking to the left. Ayan. Paharap siya pa ganun, no? So dito dito yung kanyang eyes, nose, and mouth, back of the head, neck, top of the head. Okay? So the front part of the brain is described as anterior. Okay? Always yan. Itong part na to. Always it's described as anterior. Okay? Naka-side view man siya, nakaharap man siya, nakahiga man yung patient natin, it will always be described as anterior. The front part. Okay? The back part of the brain is described as posterior. Okay? So, pag nasa likod, we describe it as posterior. When we describe things that are on top, nasa taas, then we call it superior. Okay? Superior, which in other books they would call cranial, which means on the top side. While inferior means below or at the bottom. Okay, so these structures here na nasa ilalim, we would describe them as inferior structures. Alright? So you have your anterior, your superior, posterior, and inferior. Now, we also have dorsal and ventral. No, if you will notice, tignan nyo, dito yung dorsal nasa taas, dito yung ventral nasa baba, pero pagdating dito sa structure, yung dorsal nasa likod, yung ventral nasa harap, okay? So, first we have to define the words. When we say ventral, it literally means belly. Belly, nasa belly side, no? Abdomen, belly. So, itong ilalim na part ng brain, that is considered the belly of the brain. So, even if it is below, it can also be described as ventral because that is the belly of the brain. When we talk about naman the brainstem, the belly of the brainstem is in front. So, it's right here, the ventral aspect. When we say dorsal, it literally means on the back side. So if this is the belly, then the back side of the brain is this part. So the superior part can also be described as dorsal. Okay? But when we go to the brainstem, the back part is the one on the posterior side. Okay? So yun lang ibig sabihin ng ventral and dorsal. Belly and to the back. Alright? Now, in this image, the brain was divided into several views, no? Una, let's take this view. When the brain is cut in order to have a front and a back side, we call that coronal or frontal section. Hinati mo yung brain para magkaroon ng front half and back half. Okay? You call that coronal. So in this image, we can see, no? May middle part and we call that medial. So medial are structures that are found right in the middle. Pag nasa gitna, medial. At pag nasa gilid or outside, going outside of the midline, we call it lateral. So in this image, no, orient lang natin, no, we have the superior side here, we have the inferior side here, ganun din, ventral, dorsal, and then we have the medial, kasi yun yung nasa gitna, and then lateral, moving away from the medial, lateral. Yan, nasa mga gilid ang lateral natin. Okay? So now we are able to identify structures in the coronal or frontal view. Okay? Now, if we cut the brain in half para magkaroon tayo ng left and right parts, we call that mid-sagittal or medial section. No? Basically, hinati mo yung brain dito. Yan. Tapos, side view mo siya. So, pag hinati mo dyan, it's called medial or mid-sagittal section. Okay, so if you will look, no, almost similar, but now we can see the internal structures. Let's orient you first. The front side is still anterior. The back side is still posterior. The top is still superior. The bottom is still inferior. All right? Madali. Now, if we cut the brain in half in order to have a top and a bottom half, then we call that horizontal section. Hinati natin yung brain para magkaroon ng taas at ng baba. We call that horizontal section. So basically, tinitignan natin yung brain from underneath, no? Tinitignan mo yung brain mula sa ilalim. So, orient natin. This is the front part of the brain, so anterior. This is the back part of the brain, so posterior. This is the sides, left and right sides. So we call it lateral because it's away from the middle. And the midline is called medial. All right. So those are your anatomical directions. So if you did not catch the definitions, then I have a summary slide here. Yan. So again, anterior means to the front and ventral means the belly side. Posterior and dorsal both means on the back side. Superior or cranial means on the top. Inferior means on the lower or at the bottom. And we also have terms such as caudal and rostral. When we say caudal, at the tail end, while when we say rostral, at the nose end. Yun lang itatandaan ninyo dyan. Okay? Tail, caudal, rostral, nose end. Other terms we discussed, no? Medial is the middle line. And any structure na malapit sa medial, we call it median. No? And any structure away from the medial ay tinatawag nating lateral, away from the middle. Other terms that we did not discuss earlier are ipsilateral. So pag sinabi nating ipsilateral, these are structures found on the same side. So kunwari, my right hand and my right foot, pareho silang nasa right, so they are ipsilateral. When we say contralateral, these are found on the opposite side. So when we say left hand and right foot, they are contralateral kasi magka-opposite sila ng side. And when we say bilateral, they are found on both sides, both left and on the right. So when I say my left hand and my right hand, parehong meron, those are bilateral. Okay? Some additional terminologies that you'll discover and encounter in neuroanatomy. First is fasciculi. When we say fasciculi, these are fiber bundles or tracts. Imagine walis tingting, no? So when you group together those small pieces of wood, tawag natin sa kanya fasciculi. Pero pag mag-isa lang yung tingting, yun ay isang fiber. So in order for you to better visualize a fasciculi, take this as an example, no? When we say fasciculi, this is a group or a bundle of fibers taken together. So ayan, no, ang daming fibers na pinagsama-sama. That is an example of your fasciculi. When we say columns or funiculi naman, these are aggregate of tracts in the spinal cord. Meaning, pinagsama-sama mo naman yung mga fasciculi. So, kanina, mga individual tingting, pag sama-samahin mo, walis tingting. That's your fasciculi. Ngayon naman, bumili ka ng 10 walis tingting, pinagsama-sama mo, that's your column or funiculi. So, here we have in the spinal cord several funiculus, no? Posterior, lateral, anterior. At pag inopen up mo yan, naku, napakaraming fibers na magkakasama. May kita mo dyan. Next term that we have is decussate. Decussate means the crossing of the fibers in the tract. And this is a good example of it, no? Dito in this image, we see the fibers or the tracts. Spinal cord yan, no? At saan siya dumadaan? Doon, sa funiculus, no? So we have here, nasa left side siya. And then, all of a sudden, nag-cross over papunta ng right. So the crossing over is called decussation. Okay? Or decussate. Nag-decussate siya. Nag-cross over to the opposite side. And when we say commissures, these are horizontal tracts, no? From left to right. Ayan, ito naman siya. So yung mga fibers from left, pumupunta ng right. Horizontal yung motion. Yan po. Those are your commissures. All right? So here are some images that would show us or review our anatomical directions, no? So what view is this? Meron tayong left side and right side. This is your sagittal view. Very good. So we have here the anterior, the posterior, the superior or dorsal, and the inferior or ventral sides. Okay, here we are looking at the brain from underneath, and we call that, when you have top and bottom view, horizontal view. Very good. So, i-orient ulit natin. We have here the anterior part, the posterior part. Right in the middle is your medial. And then, any structure near the medial is called median. No, pag malapit sa middle line, median. At pag malayo towards the outside or away from the midline, we call it lateral. So, itong mga structures on the sides, lateral na po ito. Alright? Now, let's talk about the functions of the nervous system, okay? So, first, I want you to understand that the nervous system functions by receiving stimuli or by receiving sensations from the environment. So, those sensations are received by what we call receptors found all over the body. And once those receptors receive stimulus or signal from the environment, then they bring the information to the brain or to the spinal cord, basically the central nervous system, in order for the signal to be interpreted and in order for a decision to be made on what to do regarding the stimulus. Once a decision has been made, the brain or the spinal cord will send a signal back to our body in order for a response to be elicited. So, basically, yun yung general function ng nervous system natin. So, in this image, I want to show you how that happens, no? So, in our skin, there are several receptors. So, ang skin kasi natin, it can detect different sensations such as pain, vibration, touch, and heat. Diba? Nakakaramdam tayo ng mga ganyang bagay. So, let's say that somebody punctures you, tinusok ka, no? And your skin receptors will be able to detect that. They will then send a signal to the brain or spinal cord, and that signal will run through what we call a sensory neuron. So after the receptors receive the sensation, the stimulus, they will bring a signal towards the sensory neuron in order for it to reach the brain and the spinal cord, as you see in this image. And in the brain or spinal cord, a process will be done which is called integration. Okay? In that integration, a decision will be made regarding the stimulus that has been received by the body. Once a decision has been made, then they will send a signal via what we call motor neuron, and that signal will be sent to our effector organs or muscles. And then, a decision will be made or a response will be elicited. Can I just say that again now in Tagalog, no? So, ang katawan natin, meron siyang kakayahan na makareceive ng iba't ibang sensations and stimulus galing sa environment natin. So, Kapag may tumusok sa'yo, mare-receive yun ng mga receptors mo na nakikita sa ating skin. Yung mga receptors, no, kakawa sila ng signal at ipapadala nila yan sa tinatawag natin na sensory neuron. So, sensation, sensory neuron. So, yung signal na yan, dadaloy sa sensory neuron, papunta sa ating brain and spinal cord para magkaroon ng integration. Sabi ng integration, gagawa ang brain and spinal cord ng mabilis na desisyon para makapag-react tayo or makapag-respond tayo dun sa stimulus na nararamdaman natin. Once a decision has been made, nagpapadala sila ng signal gamit ang mga motor neuron papunta sa mga muscles natin, skeletal muscles natin. So kung may tumusok, let's say, sa braso mo, isasend nila yung signal papunta sa braso mo in order for your braso to move away. Diba? Kasi natusok ka. So dapat ba mas laliman mo yung tusok? Hindi, diba? Aatras ka. So yung mga ganon, no, na decisions, we do not consciously make those decisions, right? In a split second, biglang aalisin mo yung kamay mo. So basically, that function of sensation, dadaloy sa sensory neuron, integration, dadaloy sa effector, is what we call a reflex. Okay? So let's say naman, ibang sensation. Let's say you touch something hot. No? You did not know that the mug contains hot water. You touch it. So your skin will be able to feel the heat. It will send a signal from your hand upwards towards your spinal cord or brain. A decision will be made by your brain or spinal cord. They will send it back through your motor neuron papunta ulit sa kamay mo in order for your hand to release and move away. Yan, okay? So that is the function of the nervous system. It basically receives different stimulus, different sensations all over the body. It sends a signal sa sensory neuron, pupunta sa integration centers, brain and spinal cord, papadala ng signal ang brain and spinal cord to the motor neuron, papunta sa iba't ibang muscles natin in order for a response to be made. Okay? Now let's talk about the embryology or the development of the nervous system. So, of course, all development starts with fertilization, no? The union of the egg cell and the sperm cell. So once they unite, there will be cell division in order for growth to happen. So, multiple cell division will happen while some cells will mature, no? Dito, may orange cells and then biglang may red-orange. Those red-orange cells are mature cells. We call them differentiated cells, no? Until cell division will continue and cell maturation will also continue. And once a cavity is formed, signal na yun in order for that fertilized egg to go to the uterus. Kasi ito pong buong to, this entire process happens in the fallopian tube. So, kailangan mag-move siya papunta sa uterus because it is in the uterus that the baby will continue to grow. Once it is in the uterus, continuous pa rin ang cell division, continuous pa rin ang cell maturation, no? As you can see in this image, so, andyan pa rin yung orange cells natin, yung ating red-orange cells, and now meron ng pinkish cells. So, continuously gagawa ng maraming cells until mabuo yung tinatawag natin na Trilaminar Formation. So, what is the Trilaminar Formation? Ito siya guys, no? Your ectoderm, no? Which is the outer layer. You have your endoderm, which is the internal layer, and your mesoderm, which is the middle layer. Okay? So basically, this image just speaks the same thing that I mentioned. There will be fertilization or the union of egg and sperm. Cell division will happen and cell maturation as well until a cavity is formed. Once a cavity is formed, that will be a signal for the fertilized egg to implant itself in the uterus. Once in the uterus, patuloy pa rin ang cell division until magkaroon ng tatlong layers. Your ectoderm, your endoderm, and your mesoderm. So bakit mahalaga yun? Our knowledge of the trilaminar formation. Because all future organs and structures in the body will come from those three layers. In fact, it is from the ectoderm that the nervous system originates. Tandaan, galing ang nervous system sa ating ectoderm. Okay? So ano pa yung nanggagaling sa ectoderm? Skin and nervous system. Sa endoderm naman, sa ating inner layer, doon naman nanggagaling yung mga internal structures such as your, ano ba nanggagaling doon? GI tract, yung respiratory system, doon din nanggagaling, no? How about the mesoderm, the middle layer? So, doon naman nanggagaling yung musculoskeletal system natin and also the blood vessels, okay? So, let's talk about that for a while, the ectoderm as the origin of the nervous system. Yan. So, in this image, we can see here again the endoderm, the mesoderm in the middle, and the ectoderm outside. No? So, in this image, we are looking at it from the side view. In this image naman, we are looking at it from top. So, tinitignan natin siya from top. Naka-look down tayo sa kanya. And we are looking at the top of this developing embryo. Okay? So, here we have the ectoderm. And the middle part of the ectoderm, called neural plate, will start to form a depression. Lulubog po yung neural plate natin. So as you can see in this image, no? Dahil sa paglubog niya, medyo umangat na yung mga tagiliran. And then nagsastart na siyang mag-burrow down. Eventually, that neural plate will be called neural groove kapag malalim na talaga yung burrow down niya. Pag malalim na yung pagkakalubog niya. It will be called neural groove. At sa paglubog ng ating neural groove, aangat po yung mga tagiliran niya, which is now called neural fold. Yan. So, kita nyo dito, no? From flat, nung nag-start lumubog yung ating neural plate, ayan, nag-fold yung mga tagiliran niya. So, lumubog yung green part, umangat tuloy yung pink and yung blue parts natin. Right? Now, eventually, that neural groove will close upon itself. Isasara niya. Paglubog niya, magpo-form siya bigla ng tube. Yan. So, that tube is called neural tube. So, lulubog, tas itong part na to, tsaka itong part na to, magkikita sa gitna hanggang maging bilog siya. So, that's called the neural tube. Now, because of that, yung sides din niya tuloy, magmi-meet in between. No? As you can see in this image now, the pink parts almost are in the middle and the blue parts also, no, umangat na. Eventually, magmi-meet yan sa gitna. No? Sa gitna magsisimulang mag-meet, tapos magsasara din po yan pataas at pababa until maging ganito po yung itsura niya. No? Sarado sa gitna, sarado sa taas, sarado sa ilalim. And ito yung itsura niya on a side view. Buong-buo na po yung neural tube natin at nagsara na yung blue part. Again, yung blue part ay yung ectoderm natin. And then yung pink part natin, tinawag na siyang neural crest. Okay? Hopefully, malinaw po yan. Na-imagine natin how it will happen. So, explaining it again, so a groove will appear in the middle of the ectoderm and we'll call that the neural plate. The plate will continue to move down and form the neural groove, allowing the sides or the flanks to fold upon itself and form a loop configuration. Eventually, those two sides will fold and meet each other, and it will be called the neural tube, while the neural folds will also meet in the middle. So, it is in the middle where it will close first, and you know what? This middle part where it first met will eventually be the cervical part of the spinal cord. So, tandaan po yun ha. Pag tinanong kayo sa exam, where did the embryonic nervous system close? So, we'll answer it at the level of the cervical region or cervical segment. Okay? So, once it meets in the middle at the cervical level, it will leave an opening on top and an opening at the bottom. The opening on top is called rostral neuropore. Okay? While the opening at the bottom is called caudal neuropore. Again, rostral means at the nose end, while caudal means at the tail end. So top, no, or nose end, and then tail or bottom end. Ayan. Eventually, they will also close in order to form this, no? And also here. And then, when you look at it on a side view, the neural tube has already been formed and the flanks has already met, forming the neural crest. And then the ectoderm is again intact outside. You have your mesoderm here and your endoderms at the bottom. All right. So again, this is just showing another view of what I mentioned. Here is your neural plate forming your neural groove as it goes down, and then eventually it will form a tube on its own, no? Yeah. So the sides of it are called neural folds, and they will also meet in between. Yeah. So again, the level where it will first close is at the level of the upper cervical region, leaving an opening on top and an opening at the bottom. What do we call the opening on top? Rostral neuropore, while the opening at the bottom is called caudal neuropore. Eventually, those openings or neuropores will also close, no? And once it is already closed, this is how it will look like. You have your neural tube, you have your neural crest from the neural folds, and your ectoderm. Okay? So, here's another view of that. Number 3, here is your ectoderm. Number 4, here is your neural crest. And number 5 is your neural tube. Okay? So, let's now look at what will happen to each and every part once the embryo grows. So, let's talk about first the neural crest. Again, ang neural crest galing sa neural fold, no? Ayan yung mga green structures in this image. So, the neural crest is actually a collection of cells which, when you grow, will become the neurons of your peripheral nervous system. Okay, so again, what are the two parts of the peripheral nervous system? Cranial nerves and spinal nerves. At saan nanggaling yung peripheral nervous system? Sa neural crest. Okay, so now we know the origin of the peripheral nervous system. Aside from becoming the neurons and the glia of the peripheral nervous system, they will also eventually become non-neuronal structures. Sabihin, structures which are not involved in the nervous system or in the functions of the nervous system. So those include your melanocytes, your chromaffin cells, and your mesenchymal derivatives. Okay? Also, some parts of the neural crest will also become another part, no? So, in this image, balikan ko lang, in this image, no, we have the ectoderm, tapos neural crest. So, si neural crest, magiging peripheral nervous system. How about the ectoderm naman? So, the ectoderm will become placodes. Ang ibig sabihin ng placode is thickening. So, may ibang parts ng ectoderm na kakapal. And they will contribute to the developing sense organs. Or, itong mga ectodermal placodes natin, they will become your sensory organs. No? So, the nasal placode will become your olfactory epithelium. Tutulong yan sa sense of smell mo. And your otic placodes will become your auditory and vestibular receptors and ganglia for hearing and for balance. No? So, in this image of the developing embryo, no, kita natin to the nasal placodes and also the optic placode. Yan. So, saan galing yung ating mga sensory organs, ating mata, ating ilong? From the ectodermal placodes. In other books, they're also called epidermal or sensory placodes. Alright? How about the neural tube? No? Yung nagsimula sa neural plate, lumubog, naging neural groove, at nag-meet sa gitna. Sinara niya yung sarili niya, no, dito sa taas. At naging neural tube na siya. The neural tube is the origin of the brainstem and spinal cord. Okay, doon pala galing ang ating brainstem and spinal cord sa ating neural tube. Okay? So, doon din galing ang ating brain, guys. Brain, brainstem, and spinal cord, they all came from the neural tube. Now, if you will look at the neural tube, there are plates, no? plates which gives rise eventually to neurons. First, we have the alar plate. Ito siya sa taas, magkabila yan. We have left and right. And the alar plate gives rise to the sensory neurons. No? Binanggit natin yan when we discuss the functions of the nervous system. So, anong origin ng mga sensory neurons natin? The alar plate. How about the motor neurons? Saan naman ang galing? From the basal plate. Itong mga nasa ilalim. The basal plates. And the alar and basal plates are separated by a structure called sulcus limitans. Okay? Sulcus limitans. So here is another image showing the neural tube, no? So now here we will see naman no the development of the brain, the brainstem and spinal cord. So eventually the neural tube will form 3 primary vesicles which also correspond to the divisions of the brain. Kaya we started the discussion with that. So the forebrain, yan, ito siya. The midbrain, the middle part, and the hindbrain. Ito, at the bottom. And then after the hindbrain, your spinal cord. Alright? So eventually, these primary vesicles, 3 primary vesicles, will eventually develop into 5 secondary vesicles. So let's see. The forebrain will become your telencephalon, which will become the future cerebrum, and the diencephalon, which is an internal structure as mentioned, which is also a part of the forebrain. So ngayon kita na natin, no? Yan yung diencephalon and then yung telencephalon, yan yung magiging cerebrum natin. The midbrain naman will become your mesencephalon. Okay? Mesencephalon. And then the hindbrain will divide into 2. That's your metencephalon. That will be your future pons and also cerebellum, and your myelencephalon, which will become your future medulla oblongata. Okay? So, forebrain nahati sa dalawa, telencephalon and diencephalon. Midbrain, naging mesencephalon. Hindbrain, naging metencephalon and myelencephalon. And then, it will be followed by your spinal cord. Please do remember this, okay? And kung ano yung magiging structure nila in the future. So, bakit mahalaga yung sinasabi ko kanina na rostral neuropore and caudal neuropore? Ito, your rostral neuropore and caudal neuropore. Because if they do not close properly, then they can produce neural tube defects. Ayan. So, pag hindi nagsara yan, no, magkakaroon ng opening and we call those neural tube defects. Pag hindi nagsara ang rostral neuropore natin, it will lead to anencephaly, the absence of the covering of the brain. No? Kawawa naman yung baby. These patients do not last long. They die after a few hours or a few days. And then, if the caudal neuropore will not close, it will lead to the development of your spina bifida, the failure of the closure of the caudal neuropore. Okay? And you can actually detect kung ang baby sa loob ng tiyan mo will develop a neural tube defect. And how will you be able to know that? There is a blood exam that will be done on all pregnant patients. It's called alpha-fetoprotein or AFP. Alpha-fetoprotein or AFP. Galing yan sa amniotic fluid and maternal serum, no? They will extract that and then they will check kung magkakaroon ng neural tube defect si baby. And lastly, of course, the last part of our embryology is the spinal cord. Sabi na natin yung forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. Of course, that bottom part will become your spinal cord. So that's embryologic part of the spinal cord is actually composed of matrix cells. Yan naman yung composition niya. Matrix cells is a single layer. Kita nyo naman dito, no? Single layer lang siya of pseudostratified columnar epithelial cells. So pag sinabing pseudostratified, one layer lang talaga siya, pero nagmumukhang several layers. No? And ano yung mga zones or layers na fino-form na itong pseudostratified cells natin? We have your ventricular zone, your intermediate zone, and your marginal zone. So yung ventricular zone, that is the zone nearest the cavity of the neural tube. Yun yung pinakamalapit dito sa cavity ng tube, no? At diyan natin makikita most of the nuclei of the matrix cells found in that area. Next, we have your intermediate zone. Some nucleus will also be found there. But what's important to remember for the intermediate zone is that they will become the gray matter in the future. And we also have your marginal zone, which will become the white matter of the spinal cord in the future. So, let me just show you, no, kung ano ba yung mag-itsura ng ating intermediate and marginal zone. Sorry, here you go. Ayan. So again, this is the spinal cord. We have the gray matter and the white matter sa labas. So white matter, that's your marginal zone. Gray matter, galing yan sa intermediate zone natin. Alright? So malinaw sa atin yan. So this time around, we'll be talking about neurohistology. We'll be talking about the cells that are found in our nervous system. Basically, there are two types of cells that are found in the entire nervous system. The first are the neurons and the second are the neuroglia. So neurons natin, these are cells that carry the impulses. So yung mga signals natin kanina, they are actually called action potentials. So the signals that are carried by your sensory neuron towards the brain and from the brain towards the motor neuron, no? Those are called action potentials, yung mga signals. At ang nagkikarry niyan are neurons. One important thing about neurons is that they do not regenerate. Once they are damaged, they are forever damaged. Alright? And the second group of cells found in the nervous system are the neuroglia. So neuroglia naman are cells that do not carry or conduct impulses, but they support neurons in many different ways. And the most important thing about them, they have the ability to regenerate or divide. So opposite sila ni neuron, okay? Neuron, walang capability to regenerate. Neuroglia, may capability to regenerate. Neuron, they can carry action potentials. Neuroglia, they cannot carry action potentials. So anong ginagawa ng neuroglia? They just support the neurons in all possible ways. They provide metabolic and structural support. They also allow adequate conditions to make the neurons function. So first, let's talk about the neuron. No, this is how the neuron looks like in a diagram. So first, meron tayong cell body. And the cell body of a neuron is also known as soma. So all the other organelles, all the other parts of the cells, dito natin nakikita yan. No? Yan, sa loob ng soma. One of the most important cell organelles found in the soma is your nucleus. Because again, the nucleus is the control center of any cell. Right? So we have the nucleus. If you will look at the soma, may mga branch extensions, 'di ba? May mga nakapaligid sa kanya na parang mga galamay. And those are what we call dendrites. All right? So the dendrites are very important kasi they function as the marites of the nervous system. Bakit siya marites? Because it receives several information. Yan. Di ba yun ang marites? No, gusto tumatanggap lang ng mga info, ng mga chismis. So, ganun ang dendrites. It is the one that receives the stimulus, the signal, the action potential, the information from other neurons. Okay? And then, once ma-receive niya, dadalhin niya kay cell body para ma-interpret. And then, once ma-interpret ng cell body, the signal will go to the axon. Itong mahabang ito, no? This entire structure here is your axon. At yung axon ay may tinatawag na axon terminals. Yan. So this axon terminals, yan yung nagdadala ng info papunta sa dendrites ng ibang neurons. Okay? So dumidikit yung mga yan sa parts ng dendrites para maipasa yung info. Yan. So, if you will notice, the axon is protected or covered by what we call myelin sheath. At later on, i-discuss natin what is the function of the myelin sheath. So when you look at under the microscope, this is how a neuron would look like. You have your soma. The nucleus is not seen anymore kasi medyo dark. And then you have your dendrites as well. No? And one of those is your axon. So again, here we have the soma, which is the cell body. And it is an enlarged region filled with cytoplasm, the liquid portion of the cell, and the nucleus, no? It is also in the soma na makikita mo yung mga mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, rough endoplasmic reticulum, no? That's where you see them in the soma. Next, we have your Nissel bodies. Itong mga nakapaligid sa kanya, nakascatter na mga substances, those are what we call Nissel bodies. They are actually granules made up of the rough endoplasmic reticulum. At ano bang purpose ng Nissel bodies natin? They are the site for protein synthesis, tagagawa ng protein para masuplayan ng ating cell body, ang ating neuron ng nutrition. Okay? The next part is this cone-shaped extension of the soma, no? Soma, tapos pansinin nyo parang bigla siyang numipis in this part. This is what we call axon hillock. It is a cone-shaped projection of the soma, which is the beginning of the axon. So ito ng pababa is already your axon. Okay? So the axon, again, conducts action potentials away from the cell body. Axon away. So that's how you remember it. Letter A, because it sends action potentials away from the soma or cell body. While your dendrites, these are the branched extensions found in the soma, and their function is to receive stimulus. Okay? Another important part here is that the axon, no, is being covered by a layer called myelin sheath. Yan, myelin sheath. And later on, i-discuss natin ano bang function ng myelin sheath natin. So, here in this bullet, kita natin kung ano yung nagpo-produce ng myelin sheath natin. So, pag nasa central nervous system, ang nagpo-produce ng myelin sheath is the oligodendrocytes. Mamaya pupuntahan natin yan. At pag nasa peripheral nervous system, ang nagpo-produce ng myelin sheath natin ay Schwann cells. Ito po siya. Schwann cells. Alright. So, as mentioned, mahalaga yung myelin sheath natin. Because once ma-form siya around the axon, mag-iiwan siya ng gaps. No, ito may gap dito, dito rin meron, dito, tsaka dito, even here, sa sides meron, no? And those gaps between the Schwann cells or oligodendrocytes are what we call nodes of Ranvier. At bakit mahalaga yung myelin sheath natin? Because ang information, pag bumabayan at walang myelin sheath ang ating axon, again, pag ang information or action potential bumaba sa axon at walang myelin sheath, kailangan niyang baybayin yung buong kahabaan ng axon natin. So medyo matagal, di ba? Kailangan niyang mag-drive pababa para maabot niya yung mga axon terminals natin. Axon terminals. But if there is a myelin sheath surrounding the axon, yung information, imbis na bumiyahe pababa, it will jump from one node of Ranvier to another. So from here, no, say bumaba ng information. Here, hindi na kailangan bumiyahe pababa. It will just jump from one node to another. From one node to another. From one node to another until it reaches the axon terminals. So mas mabilis yung daloy, no, ng transmission ng axon potential kasi it does not need to go down the entire length of the axon. It just needs to jump from one node to the other. Alright? And once mag-connect ang ating axon terminal at ang dendrites, it will form a synapse. Okay? So, yung mga extensions ng ating cell, both the dendrite and the axon are actually grouped together as neurites. Ayun yung pangalan ng grupo ng dendrite at axon, neurites. They are branches, no? So the dendrites again are branches of the cell body or of the soma. Ang role niya is to receive incoming information, and ang tumatanggap ng information na yun are what we call dendritic spines. These are small, mushroom-like projections distributed all over the dendrite. Ayan, kalat-kalat sila all over the dendrite. Those are your dendritic spines. Diyan kumakabit yung axon terminal ng isang cell. Also, we have the axon, which is a cylindrical tube, no? At diyan kumakapit yung ating oligodendrocytes or Schwann cells, depende kung nasaan. Now, neurons can also be classified according to structure. And ano ba yung mga iba't ibang classifications natin? First, we have the multipolar neuron. And ito yung pinaka-common appearance ng ating mga neurons, no? We have the soma or the cell body. Meron siyang multiple dendrites. Kaya tinawag na multipolar kasi maraming dendrites at may iisang axon. Okay? Maraming dendrites, multiple dendrites, and one axon. Kaya multipolar. When you say bipolar, it only has one dendrite and one axon. So, tag-isa lang. One dendrite, one axon. Kaya tinawag na bipolar. And the last is your unipolar, which has one axon but no dendrites. Okay, kita niyo yung cell body, oh. Wala nang naka-attach sa kanya na dendrites. Axon lang. And then that axon will now divide para magkaroon ng subdivisions, no? Magkaroon ng sensory receptors, etc. Alright? So, yan yung functions na, classifications according to structure. So, here are some examples of our multipolar neurons, no? We have the lower motor neuron sa spinal cord, very familiar looking, no? You also have your pyramidal cell, kaya sila pyramidal cell kasi tignan nyo yung itsura ng soma, parang pyramid, no? 3 sides, no? And then we also have your Purkinje cell. At kita naman yung itsura, para sa naka-pigtail. No? Yan sila. So when you look at them under the microscope, this is how they will look like. Ito, no? Parang naka-pigtail. No? And those are your Purkinje cells. You have your soma. You have your extensions of the dendrites. So other than that, we can also classify neurons according to size. First classification that we have is your Golgi type 1. Ang Golgi type 1, mahaba ang axon. 1 meter in length ang axon nila. Okay? While ang Golgi type 2 naman, they have a short axon. And in some cases, minsan, walang axon itong neurons na ito. Okay? Another difference is, mas marami ang Golgi type 2. They are greater in number than type 1. Okay? That's another difference between the two. Alright? And where can you find your Golgi type 1? They can be found in the brain and spinal cord and peripheral nerves. While the Golgi type 2 can be found in your cerebrum and cerebellum. Okay, so this is how they would look like. Again, Golgi type 1, those are the ones with long axons, no? Sometimes umaabot daw ng 1 meter in extreme cases. Tapos, yung mga singular lang, na may ikli lang, those are your Golgi type 2. So here, we have one, another type 2, another type 2 here, another type 2 here. So, mas marami daw ang Golgi type 2 compared to type 1. So now let's go to cell anatomy, no? So ano ba yung iba't ibang structures found in the soma or in the cell body? Of course, we already mentioned the nucleus. It's the control center, it stores the genes, and it's usually centrally located, no? So here we have a cell body, And then, kita natin yung ano niya, no? Yung shape ng cell na yan. And then, right in the middle is your nucleus. Alright? So, right inside the nucleus is a darker staining material. We call it nucleolus. Nucleolus. Okay? The nucleolus is the darker staining part inside the nucleus. At anong function ng nucleolus natin? For protein synthesis. May nabanggit tayo kanina na gumagawa rin ng protein, di ba, in the cell body, and that is your Nissel body. Yan, your Nissel body. These are granular materials saan gawa? Rough endoplasmic reticulum responsible for synthesizing protein. So ito siya, yung mga patsi-patsi na nakikita nyo rito. Even in this image, we can see them, no, the dark patches around the cytoplasm. Alright. Next, we have your Golgi Complex. So the Golgi Complex appears as irregular, wavy na mga flatted structures, no? Wavy appearing, flat appearing structures. And what is their function? They function for storage, for chemical modification, and for packaging of substances. So, once magawa ng nucleolus yung protein, or once magawa ng Nissel bodies yung proteins natin, dadalhin nila yan kay Golgi Complex para ma-modify, ma-store, at ma-package po ni Golgi Complex yung mga substances na specifically yung proteins na pinoproduce. We also have the mitochondria, which is famously known as the powerhouse of the cell, no? So, it takes part in a process called tricarboxylic acid cycle and the cytochrome chain of respiration. And itong dalawang process na to, yung way of production ng energy. So, paano gumagawa ng energy ang mitochondria? By taking part in the tricarboxylic acid cycle and the cytochrome chains of respiration. We also have your neurofibrils. Yan yung mga parallel fibers that you see in this image, no? Kalat-kalat all over the nucleus. So, they are the main component of the cytoskeleton. At anong function nila? They maintain the shape of the cell. So, sila yung nagme-maintain ng shape ng buong nerve natin. And it allows the cell to be stable. Okay? Para hindi nag-iiba-iba yung shape ng ating cell. Next, we have your microfilaments. So, ang microfilaments are usually made up of actin. At ang actin is known for movement or contraction. So, sila yung nag-a-assist in terms of transport. Let's say, may gustong i-move ang cell natin na part niya. Gusto niyang i-move ang mitochondria. Gagamit siya ng microfilament para ma-transport yung mga bagay na yan. And we also have your microtubules. So, itong microtubules, para naman siyang stationary track. In simple terms, imagine, no, kung may gustong igalaw na part ang ating neuron, maglalatag siya ng microtubules para maging rail track or maging daanan ng i-move na substance, no? So, ang microtubule yung magiging kalsada. It is the stationary track where the organelles will move. And yung microfilament natin, yan yung parang sasakyan na mag-move doon sa mga organelles natin. Okay? We also have your lysosomes, no? Which contain hydrolytic enzymes in order to kill, in order to digest mga waste products inside the nerve or inside the neuron. So there are three forms of lysosomes. Your primary lysosomes, ito yung mga bagong gawa na mga lysosomes, they are just formed. Secondary lysosomes, they contain partially digested material. Ito yung mga lysosomes na may laman na or nakadigest na ng mga substances. And residual bodies. Ito naman yung mga lysosomes na tapos nang mag-digest ng mga substances. And after nilang kainin yung mga waste products, it will leave two products, pigment and lipid. Okay? So in fact, yung pigment and lipid, may pangalan din sila. It's called lipofuscin. So these are the yellowish brown granules found in the cytoplasm. Galing yan sa digestion ng ating lysosomes, and they are harmless metabolic byproducts. We also have your centrioles. Dalawa yung centrioles natin, kaya paired structure siya. And they are very important during cell division. Okay? We also have melanin granules. So melanin, hindi lang pala sa balat nakikita yan, but also in our nerve cells. So what's the function of that? No? It is a catecholamine synthesizing pigment. Ibig sabihin, tumutulong ang melanin granules na mag-produce ng catecholamine. So ano ba yung catecholamine? It's a neurotransmitter. Specifically, example niyan, dopamine. So isang part ng brain may laman na melanin granules, and that part of the brain is called substantia nigra, and it's found in the midbrain. Okay? Next, we have the plasma membrane. Ito naman, of course, yung wall ng ating neuron, di ba? Yan yung nagpe-prevent or nagpo-protect sa ating nerve cell from the invasion of different substances and microorganisms. So it is the boundary of the cell body. And yan yung dyan dumidikit yung iba't ibang mga neurons, iba't ibang mga pwedeng axon terminal or dendrites, at doon nagkakandak yung nerve impulse natin. So basically, siya yung wall ng ating cell. So now let's go to the second group of cells found in the nervous system, and these are your neuroglia. There are 4 major neuroglial cells, and these are your astrocytes. No, ito siya, para siyang star, no? Ang dami ng extensions, astrocytes. You have your microglial cell, you have your ependymal cell, and your oligodendrocytes. Ayan. Alright, so let's talk about them one by one. So the astrocytes have two classifications: fibrous astrocytes and protoplasmic astrocytes. Ang fibrous astrocytes natin, they have long, slender na mga extensions or processes. So mahaba yung kanyang mga galamay. And usually we find these fibrous astrocytes in the white matter. Okay? While protoplasmic astrocytes, they have shorter na mga processes or galamay, pero mas marami. No? There are more branches compared to your fibrous astrocytes. And where can you find this? In the gray matter. Now, what is the function of your astrocytes? Let's see. So, they give a supporting framework. Kasi nga, neuroglial cells, function nila to give support. Sabi natin kanina, they support the neurons in all ways possible. So, they provide a supporting framework. But more importantly, please do remember, your astrocytes form what we call as the blood-brain barrier. So itong blood-brain barrier is important kasi siya yung nagre-regulate ng flow of ions, sugars, carbon dioxide in and out of the neurons. Basically, para siyang gate. Siya yung nagsasabi kung makakapasok ba sa brain yung mga substances na yan o hindi. No? So when you take medications, when you take drugs, even when you have bacteria or viruses or fungi moving through your bloodstream, hindi yan makakapasok sa brain hanggat hindi sabihin ng blood-brain barrier. Kaya ang brain natin is very much protected from the effects of different substances and from infection. Kaya pag nagka-infection sa brain, medyo mahirap din i-treat kasi hindi lahat ng gamot papasok sa blood-brain barrier natin. Okay? So it also prevents toxins and poisons from entering the brain. Kita nyo naman, no? Ito siya, yung ating astrocytes. Kumakabit siya sa mga axons, kumakabit siya sa iba't ibang part para suportahan yung ating mga neurons. So this is how the blood-brain barrier would look like, no? Itong mga to, yan yung mga astrocytes natin, nakadikit sa ating mga blood vessels. Kasi syempre, yung mga substances na umiikot sa dugo, sa blood vessels natin yan manggagaling. So, bago makapasok ng brain, kailangan lulusot muna or kailangan payagan muna sila ng ating mga astrocytes forming the blood-brain barrier. Next is a familiar term, oligodendrocyte, na encounter na natin to kanina. Siya yung gumagawa ng myelin sheath kapag nasa central nervous system. Kapag nasa peripheral nervous system, anong tawag sa gumagawa ng myelin sheath? Schwann cells, no? So these oligodendrocytes are very small cells and they have a few processes. May konting galamay lang sila. Okay? At ang ginagawa nila, they create myelin sheath which surrounds the axons of the different neurons. Yan. Kita nyo naman dito, no? This is our axon, tapos napaligiran na siya ng myelin sheath na create ng oligodendrocytes. So this is how they would look like under the slide, yung mga malalaking cell, that's your astrocytes, and then oligodendrocytes, sabi natin, no, very small cell with very few projections as well. Next, we have your microglia. Ang microglia is actually an immune cell. So, they are from macrophages which originated outside the nervous system, no? At nung nakarating sila sa nervous system, pinayagan sila ng blood-brain barrier para maging mga guards or maging mga police. For what purpose? They function for immunity. Meaning, tumutulong sila to kill infections. Okay? So they are the smallest of the neuroglial cells and they are scattered throughout the central nervous system. So kapag walang infection, they are called inactive microglia or resting microglial cells. Anong itsura ng resting microglial cells? Ganito po. Kita yung mga galamay nila. And very small lang yung cell body. But in inflammation or during an infection, they become activated and are called immune effector cells. So kapag active na sila, nawawala yung mga galamay nila. They retract their galamay or processes and they migrate to the site kung nasaan yung infection. And once they are there, they will digest or they will attack the offending agent. Yan. So eventually, kakainin nila yon. And again, anong resulta ng digestion? Lipids and pigments. Yan. Next, we have the ependymal cells. So itong mga ependymal cells naman natin, they form the lining of the brain's ventricle. So may mga parts kasi ng brain natin na tinatawag na ventricle. So yung mga ventricles na yan, ang mga cells na nandyan are ependymal cells. Even the central canal of the spinal cord ay na-line din po. It contains ependymal cells. At bakit mahalaga ang ependymal cells? Because they produce your CSF or cerebrospinal fluid. Okay? So natutulungan ng mga cilia or ng mga hair-like extensions of the ependymal cells na mag-flow ang cerebrospinal fluid. So there are different types of ependymal cells. We have your ependymocytes, your tanycytes, and also your choroidal epithelial cells. So here is how it would look like, no? If let's say this is a ventricle, nandoon din yung mga ependymal cells mo at tutulong sila na i-create yung cerebrospinal fluid. Okay? So, yung types of ependymal cells depende sa location. So, kapag nasa central canal of the spinal cord ka, ang main ependymal cells na nandoon are ependymocytes. Pag nasa third ventricle ka, ang main and your choroidal epithelial cells are found naman in the choroid plexus. Okay? So, I believe I have another image here showing that, no? So, you have your ependymal cells. You also have your tanycytes. Yan. However, wala tayo nung third type. Yan. And lastly, we have the extracellular space. Those are the white spaces that you see surrounding each neuron. Okay? So, those are the gaps. And those spaces provide a pathway in order for ions and molecules to be transmitted from the bloodstream towards the different nerves or neurons. All right? So that's the end of our discussion. Hopefully, we're able to learn something. Good luck and God bless you. Shalom.